Alrighty. Welcome everyone. Welcome back to WorkSmart Live. Today is Back Up to Basics. I'm Dawn Church. I'm WorkSmart's events manager. Thank you all so much for being here. And as always, a big, huge thank you to our friends and our client over at the Durham Chamber of Commerce for partnering with us on these webinars to get this information out to the local business community. So we're happy to work with them in so many different ways. And of course, we have the fabulous Marissa Wayman back this week too.
Hello, everyone.
You can all virtually wave at her. She will feel the love through the screen. Alrighty, so Back to the Future series. This series is all about looking forward, right? We've talked about new technologies. We've talked about future planning. We've talked about better systems that support our modern workplaces. So I get it if it seems a little odd for us to say, all right, let's back up to the basics in this series, right? But implementing all of these forward-thinking tools and technologies and processes really impacts how we are using and working with data on the day-to-day. And anytime that we do that, anytime we kind of change up how we're working and implement new tools and technologies, we need to really back up and make sure that we're backing things up because we can design that perfect new system and that perfect new filing system like we talked about last week with files everywhere. But if somebody accidentally deletes that system, it doesn't matter how perfect it was if we can't recover it. So anytime that we do something like this, we need to back up to the basics and double check that our I's and our T's are crossed. And that's what we're going to do today. We're going to talk about how to do that simply and easily and making sure that everything that you have, all of this new stuff that you're doing is backed up and recoverable. So with that, Marissa is going to take us through the very basics of why, what, where, and how of backups. And whenever you're ready, you can take it away and start with the why.
Awesome. I mean, in essence, we all know what backup is used for. We're not going to start the presentation by going through a bunch of scary statistics about data loss because, we're all familiar with the risks. We all know about deleting your presentation an hour before the proposal meeting. We know about ransomware holding your data hostage. We also know that power can interrupt you while you're on a webinar.
Marissa.
Yeah, me. We also know hardware and software fails and it can corrupt data. Theft, that's the thing. There's also these things where your site gets compromised. That's your server and your backup. So disaster recovery is, something we talk about regularly. And of course, now that we've scared you in a sense, in the lightest way possible, we're going to focus the rest of this conversation on planning. Backup and recovery in its simplest form has two things to it. It's creating a copy of your data and then making that copy accessible when it's needed. So we're going to talk about how to actually back up what you need to the right place at the right frequency so that you can restore files, systems, or your entire site if and when it's needed. So that's that, what, where, when, and how, now that we've covered the why. Before we start talking about it, I do want to frame the conversation. So in order for your plan to be effective, you need to think through risks that are specific to your organization. Now, based on our experience with small businesses, whether it's our own procedures or working across various industries, there are several solutions and best practices that will help you get the right coverage, but that also fit your budget. So as we discuss things, think about cost and risk tolerance as being a critical component. High availability solutions can introduce more complexity and drive the cost of a solution higher. So we'll kind of walk through that so we can kind of gauge what our needs are going to be across the way and what different solutions exist. So the first place to start is that what? It's identifying the stuff that you're going to be backing up, and knowing how important that stuff, how important it is to you, is going to help you determine how you're going to back it up, which we'll talk about later. So what does that mean? When we talk about servers, we're actually talking about servers in your office. You'll see this little orange icon as throughout the conversation to represent servers that live in your office. These are complex system configurations mixed with applications and data. So when we talk about backup and recovery, it's three pieces. It's how you recover files, it's how you recover the actual system itself, and how do you protect yourself against losing a site. Now, the data that you save on an employee's computer is typically just files, although there are going to be some special circumstances. Lab computers come to mind. These may have more complex setups that may need to have more comprehensive backup coverage like a server would. Now, all the way on the other side of that is the stuff that lives in the cloud. That stuff needs backups too. Cloud infrastructure, like something that lives in an Azure VM, that's backed up to the cloud. Makes sense. But for the purpose of this conversation, we're really going to focus specifically on cloud applications, software as a service, like Microsoft 365. I'm going to do a fact check here, and it was quicker for me than I was. The animation was quicker than I was. But do solutions like Microsoft 365 need a backup? And the answer is, I bet you all know, is true. Google, Microsoft, ShareFile, those types of, or Salesforce, those types of solutions, they protect your data in the event that their infrastructure fails. But they maintain the stance, all of them, that you're responsible for backing up your data for other recovery scenarios. So we'll talk through what that means more in a second. But I do want to warn you, when we talk about cloud backup, and there's a difference than cloud storage. Cloud storage might be SharePoint or your OneDrive. You can certainly sync files to those locations, but it's important to think of those as an additional storage space, like an add-on for your hard drive. A cloud backup is actually something that works in the background to capture your data, which makes it reliable every time. So cloud storage is something the user interacts with. Even though you can set it to automate sync, still a user interaction, backup happens in the background.
Marissa, before you move on from that,
Yes.
Can you share for a second about, we had a question come in about Microsoft 365's retention policies. So why do we need a backup for Microsoft 365?
So that's a great question. It's a question that we come across a lot. So the best way to say this is that Microsoft reviews data retention and data backup as two different services. Their retention policies address this kind of long-term storage and regulatory compliance perspective. You label data depending on the sensitivity or the class it fits in. Retention policies and deletion policies are there to help protect and preserve data. Data backups are designed for short-term storage and recovery. So to kind of even, to emphasize why retention policies don't make sense here beyond Microsoft saying you need a third-party backup. But backups make it easy and quick for you to recover and restore. And ideally, it's in a location that is not the same as where you're recovering up from. Retention, the way it's governed by Microsoft, it has different policies across different applications. So it adds a much bigger layer of complexity, and it is time consuming to set up. But Microsoft doesn't publish an easy way and a reliable way to know how quick it's going to turn around to restore, even how to restore that particular data, because it's not the purpose of that data. So we always recommend third-party backup. I hope that makes much sense as mud.
I think you're good. I think we got it. And we're actually going to talk a little bit about that some more as the webinar goes on. This is not a concept that's going away.
No, recurring themes. All right. I presume no more questions, so I'll just talk about physical copies of data. So I like to mention this when it comes to backups, because physical copies, whether it's storage media, if you rotate external hard drives, or if it's paper, you can use a waterproof or a fireproof safe to protect it. A safety deposit box at a bank is another place to protect physical data from the elements. But of course, we're always encouraging digital transformation.
Marissa, what is digital transformation?
Why, Dawn, I'm so glad you asked. This is probably my least favorite term out there currently. It's so buzzy.
I know, that's why I had to ask you.
I love it. So digital transformation is moving, it's simply put, it's just moving your business processes to the cloud. So it's more than just this concept of using technology. It's actually like digitizing the way you do work. It's kind of more, while we're on buzzwords, it's digital transformation is the synergy of business and technology. I like that. All right, so unless we have other questions about digital transformation, which we could talk about all day, essentially this whole series is about digital transformation. We've talked about the why, we've talked about the what, so now there's that where. So we've identified what we're going to back up. So where do we put it? Before we talk about kind of the places data can exist as a backup, I want to tell you about a backup rule called the 3-2-1. And the reason why I bring this up is because it basically represents the idea of spreading your risk. So the 3-2-1 rule is having multiple copies of data that live in more than one place with at least one going off site. So, you know, there could probably be arguments about the exact way, you know, 3 copies of your data, which is the original source, plus 2 copies of your backup. You know, there's a specific method to that, but the idea is don't put all of your eggs in one basket. So as we talk about cybersecurity, we talk about layers, backups require layers as well. And so I'm going to talk about this in like the simplest terms. We've got 2 options, basically. We've got your office and we have the in the cloud. So on one side, you have a local, you know, in your office, a local backup, which are ideal for servers in your office. At the other end of the spectrum, you guessed it, the cloud is great. That's already in the cloud. In the middle, typically falls computers. So here's a few things to be aware of as we talk about on-premise backups and the cloud. So for local backups, they're typically made of a backup and a software component. And because that solution lives on the network, it's fast to restore files. Even more, the right backup solution will actually allow you to get back up working quickly in the event of a server becoming unavailable. And there's a word here I want to point out, virtualize, something we'll continue to talk more about. But virtualize is another great way to think of as business continuity. You're trying to minimize disruption. So, you know, you can do this not only for servers, you know, I mentioned servers at your office, but there's also the highly customized systems like those lab machines we talked about earlier, where you want to preserve the entire machine. There's also the segment of machines that may not connect to the internet. That would make backing up to the cloud particularly hard if there's no internet. Which leads me to tell you that this idea of being in the cloud for the rest of this conversation is this general bucket. It's really about technology that relies on an internet connection and doesn't live in your office. So the data centers, Microsoft 365, Azure, AWS, all of those we're going to classify as being the cloud. So all of that technology is always on. But what I love to remind folks is that the cloud can also provide you with a faster failover for on-premise systems. It comes at a premium price though. And even if you don't pay a premium price, you can still send backups off-site regularly for added insurance. You would just need to rebuild those machines later and not rely on the cloud to kick over immediately. There's a lot to take in for a second. So I'm going to take a sip of water. Are there any questions on kind of the concept of at your office or in the cloud?
I don't have any questions in the queue right now, but you can definitely send them my way. But just to kind of like reiterate Marissa's point, there's a reason why there's some like, well, why we're using air quotes and, you know, also actual quotes there around in the cloud. Some people kind of think you put it on the internet and it's just in the internet, right? It exists in the ether. That is the cloud. But that's actually still a physical location, right? It's not just data that exists in the mist of the atmosphere. It's data that you're sending elsewhere. So there's the reason why there's some air quotes there, because it's kind of important to still remember that this data is saved at a physical location. So the difference here is really the physical location of the where. Is it the physical location of your office, or are you using an internet connection, which is the difference, to send that data to a different physical location that's away from your office? So, and Marissa kind of talked a little bit about the reasons why you would maybe have your computers back up at your physical location, some of them, and why you might have other ones that go to the cloud. For the most part, your backup is going to go to the cloud nowadays in a modern workplace. But for these really specialized computers that are, like Marissa mentioned, like maybe some lab computers that have a lot of data or very sensitive data, or maybe something, she was giving me the example the other day of a computer that lives in a construction trailer that doesn't really have reliable access to the internet all the time. Like, these are things that you would still use a server for. So there's a little bit of a difference between the where, and it's kind of important to think about both of these things. And we're going to get to that next, I think, if I remember right.
Almost there. It's
Okay.
actually a good segue because, you know, we've talked about a lot. You know, the what and the where are certainly big pinnacles of it, and it's probably most commonly what we think about when we talk about backups. And John, we will connect the dots here, but we have to talk about when first. And when covers how often backups will occur. You know, every 15 minutes, 4 times a day, once per day. What is that? What guides your schedule is how you work. And so, you know, if you back up once a week, you're potentially going to lose a week worth of changes. So, you know, evaluating your tolerance across the different types of data that needs to be backed up is important. You know, think about the way files are manipulated. Some are manipulated by users. How often do users change? Is it something they're working on ferociously for all day, every day for 2 weeks? In that sense, it would be really important to capture some of those changes more granularly. But if it's a document that you work on once a month, perhaps you don't need as frequent of backups. Another side of that is not just how users manipulate data, but your applications. So, you know, if you have something on the server that's processing data at a high rate, you probably are going to want more frequent backups. The other piece of this is to make sure it's automatic, because the question is, do you want to, do you want a piece of your backup strategy to rely on a human to remember to trigger it? The hint? No, you don't. And as we talk about scheduling server backups specifically, it's important to mention full backups versus an incremental backup. So how does it work? Well, as the name suggests, a full backup backs up everything, every time. An incremental backup actually backs up just the files that have changed since the last backup, hence the name incremental. Full backups give you a single point to recover from, which makes it fast and reliable. Incremental backups are smaller, therefore they're quicker to complete, so they're faster to back up, and they take less storage space, which the combination of these things makes it a very attractive, cost-effective solution for small businesses. But of course, there's going to be cons with this. As every great thing, there's cons with everything. Every great thing, everything. The full backups are more time consuming. They're bigger, so they're slower to back up, and they require more storage and more bandwidth to do it. Then on the other side of that, for that less resource commitment, is that incremental backups, because one backup relies on the previous backup, there's some risk to failure for recovering or retrieving data if a part of that, we call that a backup chain, if a part of one of the backups in that backup chain has damage to it, it could impact the entire backup process. So when do you choose? The good news, as I hinted at earlier, is that many organizations have that multi-layered approach. They're taking a full backup, but it's less often, and then they're capturing the changes in the data through the incremental backups. So we're getting the best of both worlds. It's really fabulous. So that's my spiel on when. It's a very, for us, we recommend frequent backups to be 1 hour for user data. Once a day is great. If you less often use it 4 times a day, taking a full backup daily is a lot of work. So although in a perfect world, you would have a single, beautiful, complete backup, but realistically, stacking all those backups on the same storage appliance will eat up space as you continue, and costs will grow from there. So we have found that a combination of full backup and incremental backup are very valuable when it comes to balancing cost and risk.
We have a couple of questions that came into the queue. One is sort of about what we're talking about right now. There's a couple other things that I'm going to hang on to for later, because I think we're getting to that. But one question was, what if you need to keep data for longer periods of time, but probably won't have a need to access it frequently or maybe ever, I'm thinking.
Yeah, so this to me sounds like almost like an example of archiving. So if backup again is that short-term recovery. We're thinking about what happens if I need to go. Usually, if you delete a file, pretty quickly you've deleted a file. Archiving is the idea of long-term storage, and there's different options to do it. It can be a separate component of the backup strategy. So this would be another, like, when a win really dictates a complete kind of different process. And I think I would be remiss if I didn't mention that the cloud makes this process even better than before. So, maybe 5 years ago, data that you archive, we might have pulled it off the server and put it on a special storage media, maybe like an external hard drive, and you would put it somewhere safe. The cloud now makes it easy and very low cost to do something like archival storage, where you're taking data and you're putting it to the cloud, and then the cost to store it is super low. But the reason why it's super low is because the cost to access it is very high, because you shouldn't have to access it. So basically, if you have data that you're not going to touch, you can explore an archival solution, whether it's on premise or in the cloud. Awesome.
You're good. I forgot I was muted there, but you're good. Carry on. Thank you.
Did you have, I think you said there were some questions, but were you going to hold on to all of them, or did you have another one?
There are a couple other questions, but I think we're about to get to a section where we're going to talk about this. So I'll bring these up again there.
Cool. Well, then the last piece of the puzzle, Dawn, is the how. So, going back to the beginning of the conversation, the what and the where determines how you back up and recover a file. So here we recognize some of these icons we've carried across. So let's talk about the server files. For files that live on that local server, that on-premise equipment, it's ideal to back up to a device in your office. And that device should capture those changes frequently enough so that you can quickly restore without losing any progress. Here, I've just we've thrown in some icons to kind of help you maybe spark some familiarity. If you're an existing client with WorkSmart, we have our own managed backup solution called Data Vault that kind of encompasses this idea. Part of that is this StorageCraft software, which you can use without Data Vault, and there's other backup products that are similar. It's an image-based backup solution, and we'll talk about that here in a second. Preview. Now, remember, cloud files, we want to look at a cloud-to-cloud backup because cloud storage is not cloud backup. AvePoint is a big one that has a backup solution that covers all of the aspects of Microsoft 365. You have to be careful when you're looking specifically at Microsoft 365 backups because not all of those apps like Teams and Planner are covered in all of those backups. AvePoint will back up Planner, Teams, Microsoft Groups, Exchange Online, OneDrive, SharePoint, all the pieces.
So this is where I want to drop this other question because you just said what I was looking for. So we had a question that came in with two parts. So second part is that they no longer have a server. So is there a way to back up Office 365 Outlook stored emails? And you just mentioned Exchange Online. So I figured now would be a good time to talk about that.
Absolutely. So when we talk about Microsoft 365, we're talking about an umbrella of productivity applications, if you will. And the email component is Exchange Online. Outlook is the mechanism in which you view those emails and you work within those emails. But the service itself is Exchange Online. A cloud-to-cloud backup like AvePoint or WorkSmart actually repurposes the AvePoint product as our cloud-to-cloud backup solution for Microsoft 365. That covers the email piece of it, as well as the other different pieces of it. So OneDrive for file sharing is another really common one that users use.
Mm-hmm. On the note of OneDrive for file sharing, I know it's not quite what we're talking about now, but Kathy had a question that says, when forwarding a OneDrive stored Office 365 document, how can I do it without being read-only? I know it's a little bit of a pause, but.
How can I do it without it being read-only? So there should be some settings when you go to share that when you hit into the share prompt, there's a window that opens. This is my window. And in the window, there'll be kind of a drop down that allows you to choose who you can share with. It's kind of like who you can share with and how you share. And within there, you should be able to specify whether it's read only or edit writes. There's also some configuration settings on the back end that I'd be more than happy to connect with you afterwards to kind of go through. There might be something that's set there, either at your organizational level or at your level, it says, make everything I share by default read only, or read only mode, same thing.
Cool, that's all I got right now. So, carry on.
I shall. All right, computer files. So there's a few options based on the needs of the mission. We've kind of already talked about this, but for the most part, employees are going to be storing, they're going to be best protected by an automated file level backup that goes to the cloud. So again, we're talking about I've always liked to pick on this particular story. You have an executive who deals with a lot of important data. And they tend to be really busy and mobile. And so a lot of times they store critical data on their machine so they can have quick and reliable access to it. But especially as you travel, you open yourself to risk of losing that data. And so we find that having a cloud backup that happens in the background and constantly across multiple devices can sync to the can back up to the cloud is very valuable in the event that they accidentally don't store it on the server, or they miss serving it in the cloud for some reason. Two solutions, CrashPlan, Carbonite, all of those offer this type of computer level backup. It's not uncommon to hear about. You probably use them in your personal machines. The WorkSmart product is data safe, and it actually uses the CrashPlan. So as we move from restoring files to talking about here in a second about recovering the machine or the server itself, it's important to kind of talk about these differences between a file level backup and an image level backup. So file level backups back up each file. An image-based backup, as the name suggests, takes a complete image, or a snapshot. I feel like our camera here to illustrate the snapshot of an entire system. So that's files, that's the system, the OS configurations, it's executable programs, it's the whole thing. And the reason why this is important is because the way you back up at these levels impacts how you recover. So for files, you recover and restore individual files or folders. At the image level, you're not only are you able to restore those individual files or folders, but now you're looking at the entire machine. So a good way to think about this: mobile equipment, tablets, laptops, talking about files, that's file backup and recovery. It's great at the file level because it's not a complex system configuration. So if one of those systems goes down, you're not looking at days of rebuilding it. So the user generated data that it needs, you can get to that pretty quickly. Now on the other side, if you're talking about recovering a server or something like, we're picking on lab machines, but servers and complex systems, they're running programs and services all the time. So you're not just looking for the files, you're actually needing that entire image, because if something were to happen, you don't want to spend days rebuilding the machine. This, if you need your tech to operate daily, downtime is going to be a huge bummer. So having a full image backup really makes sense there. Ooh, I heard the potential for a question.
There wasn't a question. I thought about jumping in and adding. I can share my thoughts, but
Share your thoughts.
Yeah. So we really wanted to pause and kind of hammer in on this point, because they are two different things. And the way that I kind of think about it as an everyday user, not super technical person, because I'm the events manager here, right? Not the technical person that Marissa is if you've ever got a new iPhone and you take your device and you go into the iPhone store, and then they put everything back onto your iPhone in the exact same place that it was on your last iPhone, that's what can happen with an image level backup. So not only do you get all of your files or your apps, they're not coming onto your iPhone as a list, right? They're coming onto your device in order in the exact same place that they were before. So if you need to restore a file, totally fine for that to come to you as a file that you then have to go and put in its rightful place. If you need to restore an entire computer, you do not want a list of 20,000 different files that you then have to go sort and put into the right places. That's terrible and time consuming and awful and sounds miserable to me. So both of these things are really important, and they serve different purposes. Those are my thoughts.
Yes, they're good thoughts. They're great thoughts. And it's the perfect thought to lead us into Marissa explaining it all with business continuity. If you didn't wake up in the morning wanting to hear Marissa's name in a tagline, you're welcome. So now we're going to, we're going to start putting together everything we've discussed so far. And this first one is going to be business continuity for on-premise systems. So what happens if your server fails? An option is to virtualize at your office. So if you have that server in your office, it is being backed up by a robust backup solution, software to manage the backups and hardware to store the backups. We've got our image snapshots happening of the server going to the backup hardware. But then your server goes offline. A drive has failed, and now you cannot work. Who are you gonna call? Ghostbusters? No, just kidding. But in all seriousness, it doesn't have to be a painful conversation that ends with a lot of unexpected costs. Instead, with the right resources that are built into the hardware and the right software, you can call your IT team to actually take your backup and boot it right there on the backup solution, so that you're taking your downtime from however long it would take you to either fix the issue, because maybe the hard drive failed, and now you have to replace that particular hard drive. You gotta wait to switch it out. Or maybe it's the server is completely, and now you have to buy a new one. You don't wanna wait to buy a new one, and you may not wanna keep just a spare server in the closet. So using that backup hardware to get you back up and running can mean days to hours. And I mentioned this earlier about Data Vault. WorkSmart is not alone in this at all. BDR, or backup and disaster recovery solutions, are a standard option that have been widely used through the small business community to give them that option to have business continuity right there in the office in a fast and easy, cost-effective way. Everyone's happy, right? Except when, if you have this low tolerance for being down, this might not be the right solution. So, I do want to mention what happens if you do need to work faster. Environments that cannot afford downtime and therefore have a lower risk tolerance may want to pay a premium for faster failover to the cloud. These options can take downtime to mere minutes. I feel like I should, at this point, it's like, or seconds. The idea is that it's very quick and can be relatively seamless, but it's all dependent on that price tag. Options like Azure Site Recovery or even StorageCraft has a data center cloud option that allows you to have that seamless business continuity if your business requires it. So again, it's that cost versus risk conversation, because it does introduce higher costs and can add more complexity, making it less of a standard for small businesses. Yay, the actual yay guy. So what happens if your physical server and your backups are compromised? Sending a copy of your data off-site regularly gives you the ability to reduce risk. If you send backups over the internet to a storage location, you can, retrieve it and rebuild it wherever you need to. So let's say you send your backup locally, but once a night via the internet, you're going to take that whole day, that backup, and you're going to send it off-site, so that if something were to happen overnight, you have a copy of your data living somewhere other than your facility. If that data center is local, you can drive over and grab it. Let's say it's an instance that affects only your office. You drive to the data center, grab the copy of the data, and you could go to your other location and take that image and boot it up on new hardware. Ta-da, you're working. The other option is if something were to happen, maybe you just decide to take that image and then decide to build a new infrastructure in the cloud. It's an option. Both of these are more cost effective when you think about risk. How often would you need to recover from offsite backup? If your risk is low enough, storing it offsite is just as something that you can retrieve and rebuild is great. But if your risk tolerance is something that makes it very painful to be down for very few, for a very short time, a solution like we just discussed a minute ago, like an Azure Site Recovery or the StorageCraft Cloud, are options to give you that peace of mind that you may need. Now, something like an Azure Site Recovery is an ongoing kind of the synchronous relationship between an Azure cloud environment and what's living in your office. StorageCraft kind of blends a couple of options together where they give you the option to just send the data offsite that they can send to you in the event of a disaster. They also give you the option, though, to pay a little bit more and virtualize components of your backup and the server in the cloud if it were to fail. And it kind of builds options onto there. So if you fall into this category, I highly encourage you to discuss it with your IT team so that you can figure out the right solution and strategies for you. There's also kind of these two little hows, the two H's, that kind of round out this how we're going to back up. So, we know what we're backing up. We know where it's going to back up. We want it to be backed up in multiple places. We want to have some kind of disaster recovery component. So how do we make sure it works? Who is going to be in charge of monitoring the success of the backup? Because having a backup is only part of the protection. I know in our minds, everything always works out, but we need to make sure backup jobs are completing successfully. Because remember when I said that one incremental backup could affect the integrity of the entire backup? Well, monitoring can help you prevent that from happening because you can get an alert in near real time about errors prompting you to resolve those issues. After you check it, you gotta test it. Testing is another critical step. You want to test it to make sure that you can recover it. So whether that's opening a file and testing the restore of that, or if it's taking a volume from the server and virtualizing that once a month to make sure it works, all the way to your disaster recovery plan. Do you need to test that once a year to make sure that if you're saying you're going to be up and running in 4 hours of a disaster, does it actually happen?
Like your backup fire drill.
Yes. Backup drills. I grew up in Tornado Alley-ish. I always try to claim it. I grew up in Chicago. But we live next door to a big tornado siren. So whenever anyone says like drill, I'm like, duck and cover.
Oh no.
This was a flashback for everyone.
Not the good kind of flashback.
But
earlier flashback was good. Not this.
This one. You actually bring up a really good segue. It's when you talk about a drill, you talk about setting yourself up for success. And so how can you enroll your team? We're always looking for ways to remind users on behavior that we want them to take. So the things that they can do, you can encourage them to save data in the correct place, because that's how we make sure data gets backed up. Now, if they have a tendency to store data on a computer desktop and not the OneDrive, Microsoft 365, or on your server, then you should have backups for that computer. Backing up where your users use data is critical to success. However, I will say you can make a significant impact and potentially save on cost by reminding your users regularly what backup or what data is backed up, where and when. So if they know you're going to back up certain data once a month versus another set of data every 15 minutes, they can make a very good decision on where they need to store what they're working on. So empower your users to make good decisions by being clear and also meeting them by providing them the technology that matches the way they work. So that's the who, what, where, when, why, how. I have a couple of things on this topic of disaster recovery. And it's kind of this basic checklist, but it's a bunch of questions to help you kind of think about what this concept of, oh no, I lost a site. One question is, what do you need to continue operations? And how quickly do you need it? So think your payroll or client data or third-party applications that help you do what you do. For WorkSmart, we deliver service and we bill service. So without the systems and the data that helps us identify clients and their passwords and our remote tools, without those, we can't operate. So it's critical that we have a plan, either using the right cloud technology or the right backup solution to make sure that we have our tolerance covered. You wouldn't want to be without WorkSmart for 2 weeks. So we can't put our backup strategy for 2 weeks. Then there's this, where are your risks? What happens if the internet goes out? What happens if there's a flood that destroys the server room in its entirety? These risks, what you decide as being the biggest risks for you, will let you create the recovery strategies and the resources that matter. And then of course, it also lets you know how long to expect to recover. Because again, this is all done with in mind business process. It's technology to facilitate the work that you do. Then of course, what are your backup strategies? After you've assessed risk and you've identified kind of what resources you need and when, you have to create the backups. So it's not just a thing to create the backup plan, but you have to define it and publish it so that it's byway law of your organization. The other thing is, who needs to be involved in DR? So this is, does everyone know what to expect? And most importantly, do they know what is expected of them? This is kind of this process of making sure that it works, which is, how do you make sure that your disaster recovery plan will work? So this is that expectations, but it's also regular testing and that communication. But it's more than that. It's also have your business processes changed. How often do you need to review your disaster recovery strategy so that you can make sure that if processes are updated for how you bill, like let's say accounting changes where they store data, you may need to know that to plan accordingly to make sure you capture the data. So as your business evolves, so should your disaster recovery. So that's an important for everyone to know their roles and responsibilities from the DR team, who are actually going to make the disaster recovery process happen, versus the users and knowing what to expect, how long they can expect to be down. All right. That was a long last slide.
Yeah, so all we got left is questions, right?
Yeah, all we got left is questions.
Ooh, okay. So send us your questions, just a reminder. So one thing, can you talk a little bit about how WorkSmart works with our clients to make all of this magic happen? How do we go about working with our clients to figure out the right solutions and testing and all the things?
Yeah, so, when we bring on a client, we have an onboarding process. It typically takes about 3 months. And during that process, in the sales cycle, we're building a service plan to make sure that we're providing the right level of support to your end users, that your systems are secure and reliable, and that you have a strategy that takes you forward. And so when we onboard, the expectation is that we have a good service plan to help provide that support right up front, cover your big needs. But during that onboarding process, we're going to actually learn more about you. And when we do that, we start to get more familiar with what is already in place. And then once we get further into that onboarding process and into kind of the main journey with WorkSmart, we make it a point to continue to understand your business goals alongside our service delivery team. So we've got an account manager, we have a service delivery manager, and we have a group of consultants that primarily work with your team so that they can understand how you work, because it's just as important as how technology works. So with the insight of your existing technical systems, plus the insight into how you work, we can help make recommendations using best practices across small businesses based on our experiences. We've got lots of partnerships with different different providers, period. And if a standard solution makes sense, then we'll facilitate those happening. But we also believe in the right technology. So if the data vault doesn't make sense, this on-premise backup solution with the ability to virtualize locally and you send your data offsite, if that doesn't fit your business needs, we're not going to try to make the solution fit. What we're gonna do is we're gonna whether it's bringing in other vendors if you have more complex needs, so bringing in a data center expert, or just kind of having a meeting to talk about what best fits your needs. It's really a holistic, ongoing process as part of our service. A piece that's additional would be our disaster recovery planning and management. We have projects as well as ongoing services to take it one step further. So not just backup and recovery, but a true DR planning and review process.
Cool. I think that covers that.
Cool.
Alrighty, so we have just a couple of minutes left. So Marissa, could you scooch on over to upcoming events, and while we talk about those, send us your
questions in our faces.
I was like, I think that there's a question slide. I think, right? So now that you've seen the question slide, I'm sure you're much more inspired to send us your questions. So next week, we're taking a little bit of a tech talk break, and we're going to be shifting gears a little bit and talking about something that's also super important for having modern workplaces, and that is culture. And we're bringing in our friend who you've met before on our fast forward panel at the beginning of the series, Becky Jacobs. She's the CEO of Simple Change, and we're going to be talking about leading culture. So what it means to be a leader in today's world with all of the things that are happening, and how to set the tone to foster leadership from your team members within your environment, and how to be, she put it earlier, like compassionately productive, I think was the words that she said. Felt really good when she said it, and I'm having trouble being as eloquent, which is, why we have Becky coming in to talk to you all about this next week. So join us next week. We're really excited to have her. And then for the next 2 weeks after that, we are going to be doing some Microsoft Teams trainings for everyday people. And Marissa and I will be dancing through all of them because we just can't not when we read that title. So part number 1, we're going to be talking specifically about meetings and video calls and all of the really great tools that you have within those features and how to use them. So we're not going to be making it super, super, super technical. We're going to be talking about practical, how to make the best out of these tools. So this is a great opportunity to invite all of your end users, your teammates, to listen in, especially if they're somewhat new to Teams, but stuff is changing in Teams all the time. So it's always really good to take these classes anyway, because there's new things that are happening. And then the next week, we're going to be looking at the 3 tiers of Teams. So that's how you communicate within Teams, and tasks and to-dos and a whole bunch of stuff. Join us. It's going to be great. And then we have a couple more events coming up in the series.
We sure do.
We sure do. It's surprising to me. I feel like we are already at the end of this series, and I know that I changed the date on Clay's wrap up multiple times. I don't know how it got changed back.
Back up to basics, Dawn.
Yes. It's strange to me. I feel like we're already towards the end of this series, but we just started. So a couple other things coming up. We're going to be doing some stuff around cybersecurity. We're actually going to do a end user training on cybersecurity. So you will learn things in that webinar, like how to spot a phishing email and other things that you should be doing to protect yourself and your place of work.
All the things.
From all the things. So join us for that. It's going to be great. And then we're going to talk about VDI, and then we're going to wrap it up with Clay, and then we'll see what happens after that. So you can register for all of these events on our event center at info.worksmart.com/event center. And also it'll be in your email because we'll email you. And if you can't make it live, you can send me an email and I can help you get signed up and get you the content. Or the fastest way is to just register for the event and we'll send you the recording. So that's it for today. Thank you all so much. Have a wonderful week and we'll talk to you next week.
See you next week. Bye, everyone.